Well, it's been an interesting week here for the retailing sector, for the high street. It's quite common knowledge that we've got an issue and challenge with the Arcadia Group, Philip Green's company. A lot of the news has been awash with more personal commentary on Philip Green, what we think of him or what the papers think of him. And that's certainly true. A lot of people are talking about the reasons for the Arcadia Group collapse. That's not really the focus on today's broadcast. I'm going to pick that up later on. We know as a headline, certainly COVID-19, coronavirus pushed it over the edge. The Arcadia Group's had problems for quite a number of years here. But I think in all this rush and all this commentary about what we think is likely to happen from Monday, it's quite easy to miss out what I call the personal impact and the personal effect on the individuals that connect with a company that's going into administration. Hi folks, my name is Mahmood. This is a very hastily put together broadcast which should probably call show with the very high production values. But as I was listening to the unfolding of what's happening with the Arcadia Group, so those of you who participated at Topshop, Debenhams, Dorothy Perkins, Selfridges, to name but a few of the brands that make up the Arcadia Group. And again, about 2 weeks ago, when questioned on is the Arcadia Group going to administration, there was not a public denouncement, but saying no, it's not. All the news stories are going about potentially Monday that's going to happen. And what I'm going to do in this broadcast here is to talk about administration, what it actually means in broad brushes, talk about three groups of individuals and businesses that are affected. So less on the Philip Green, less of the reasons. So this, as I was listening to it, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to do a particular broadcast on a theme here. So I thought I just want to share some thoughts and tips and advice to those groups of individuals that might be affected by what's going to happen on Monday. Talk about the emotional impact, talk about the practical side of things, talk about potentially what might happen next. And hopefully that's going to sort of provide some degree of comfort. So my name is Mahmood. I'm an accountant, educator, mentor by trade, profession and experience. My job mission over the last 26 years, really, coming up to February, has been helping business owners, individuals make more money, improve their money mindset, navigate the world of noise so they can actually do much better in their businesses. There's a facility, as if you're coming in to join, if you've got any questions, fire them into the comments box. If you're coming on later on to listen, put #replay and I'll know you're out there and I'll pick up any comments accordingly. So as I said, this is a very put together. I was going to talk about a particular theme today, but I just thought I wanted to share some thoughts for the immediacy here to give some comfort to those groups that may be affected. Certainly one of the most noticeable groups that are going to be affected by a company going to administration. Even though the Arcadia Group is the sponsor prompt for this, there's potentially anything from 15,000 jobs potentially going to be at risk here. Here's what we need to do. And I think before we look in terms of what employees potentially need to be aware of, what they need to do, that's going to help them through a pretty shitty transition, pretty shitty phase that's going to go on, is just to briefly explain what administration is and what might happen as a consequence. Now, when a company goes into administration is a more formal process. So it's the step potentially before formal liquidation. And when formal liquidation actually happens, that's it. That's the end of the company and all the assets in the business are realized for the best that they can get by the insolvency practitioner. They're then used to pay off debts in a particular order. And if there's any money left over, that gets ultimately down to the shareholders, the owners of that company. Administration, generally speaking, is a step before that. And the job of the administrator, and it looks likely that's what's going to happen on Monday, is to try and rescue and do the best that they can for the company. So it's like a pause the clock in any more debts accumulating. The company doesn't get forced into liquidation. So it acts as a protection mechanism. And if, as suspected, the company goes into administration on Monday, what the administrator will be doing is to try and see what they can do to rescue the company. It's likely to be in whole or in part. So with all the brands that make up the Arcadia Group, an ideal outcome would be to say, we found somebody who's going to come in, rescue the company, improve the cash flow, improve the trading situation, and therefore everybody's jobs are preserved. If I base this on my experience over the last 20 plus years, the likelihood of that actually happening is quite minimal. So in terms of what is likely to happen is that some of the brands may be rescuable. There is definitely, in my opinion, unfortunately, and sadly at this time of year, is going to be a head count. So it's unlikely that we'll see the Arcadia group come out the other side, in a stronger position and everybody's jobs preserved. So, but what the administrator will do will try and actually improve the cash flow, deal with the debts, so that it's a part rescue. And it could be several weeks in the making, or it could be taking, literally with the size of the group, it could take up to a year. So if you're an employee in that situation, you're employed by anybody in the Arcadia group, there's a few things. First of all, it's a very emotional time. If you've never been involved in that scenario before, then the key thing is there's a few headline things that I strongly urge you to. Number one, it's going to be very emotional impact. You could have actually worked for the company for quite a number of years. It's coming to the end. So you've got a personal connection to the brand, to your workers, to your colleagues. And there's going to be a lot of anxiety, and there's going to be a lot of stress created as a result of the unknown. The administrator will have a stronger insight to what's going on with the company, but it can be a very depersonalized situation. So that emotional roller coaster. So if you are employed by the group, if one of your family members are employed by the group, if you're aware of somebody, I think as just general members of the public, general audiences here, spare some sympathy, which we all do anyhow, for those employees. So it's a very emotionally challenging time. There's going to be a question mark over uncertainty, job security. We're coming into Christmas. We're coming into lots of stuff that's going all over the place here. So that can be a real emotionally charged roller coaster. There are things that one can do to protect that. And certainly I would definitely say, unfortunately, in times like this, we have another number of what I call vultures and scammers circling here, making promises, making trying to offer support and guidance here. Some of those may be scammers. So in that emotionally charged time, do not rush into doing something. Now, typically, as far as your rights are concerned in an administration, 2 or 3 things can happen. The administrator may go through a process that decides at some point there's going to have to be some redundancies. And if you're made redundant, there's a few things. It's for a number of people, that's a very emotionally challenging time, but it's also potentially for some individuals, it may present an opportunity depending where you are in your life, depending on what you're doing there as well. You obviously have got to look in terms of what financial support you can get by way of universal credit. Redundancy pays will come out there potentially if the company is unable to pay out any redundancy, and you've got to be there for at least 2 years. The government can step in. The government can step in and pay any accrued holiday pay, can be paid any overtime commissions and bonuses that are owed to you. So if it's unable to be dealt with by the administrator, then that will be dealt with by the government if it goes into official liquidation. But the key thing is it's not going to happen immediately. This could be several weeks. And again, you've got to make sure you've got enough funds you can actually carry on working. Now, the administrator by nature will normally expect the company to continue to trade. So it's not saying it's going to stop. That's not liquidation. And obviously there's going to be a question mark over whether your job is secure, and that's going to take a bit of time here. So it's obviously important that communication is enjoyed between yourself as the individual and your line managers and everything else. And in this situation here, by the way, there will be a lot of flux, and that not knowing what's going on is going to be quite all-embracing, unfortunately. So, calm. I know it's easy for the people from the outside to say so. Do not rush into any decisions, but understand what your actual rights are. If you're represented by a union, your union will be communicating with you. If you're not represented by a union, in terms of looking what's out for you, and I would certainly probably, if I was an individual, is make sure, and householders do this a lot anyhow, is make sure you put together a personal budget. So thinking about, as I said, especially when it's coming up to Christmas time, especially when it's coming up, if you've got family commitments, that can be quite worrying. You're thinking about what's going to be the impact, on your children, Christmas, and all the rest of it. So put it together, a personal financial plan, understanding, how your finances might shape out over the next few weeks. Now, it could be, as a result of the administration process, that you might be made redundant. There are counselling jobs out there. There's jobs, the job support scheme that's available out there to help you with universal credit, upskilling, training. They can also provide support if you need to fund yourself with travel expenses to go into looking for new jobs there. If you are made redundant and you've got to claim benefits, if you've been paying employees national insurance for a number of years, which you're likely to have been, assuming that you're not part-time and below that threshold, there is the new style job seekers allowance. So again, contact Citizens Advice, there's a lot of help obviously on HMRC Google site, but understand what your rights and benefits are, and there is some support mechanisms out there. So as employees, think about maybe your next steps there. And again, it's too early perhaps to make any rash decisions. So we don't know, the administration may end up saying if they sell some of the brands, and we have got vultures, by the way, circling the carcasses. And in most administrations, it's unlikely the company itself will be bought as a whole. Typically, somebody will be buying the underlying trade, and they may wish you to go with them as well. Now, as a general rule of thumb, if you are transferred after the administration to a new business, so that business is sold on, then you can still claim redundancy pay up to a point in time. If you, for example, are made redundant, then you've got redundancy pay that's going to come to you. It's capped at about £538 per week. But again, you might be thinking that's far too early to know what's going on. So have some sympathy. It's an emotional turmoil time. Figure out what your finances are going to look like. Figure out what you can do to manage those short-term costs until you get some certainty. Understand what your rights are, and watch out for people offering you what I called opportunities, especially when you get made redundant, that want your cash for get-quick-rich schemes and all the rest of it. So hold your counsel, get objective advice from some of the government agencies that exist out there. Fingers crossed your jobs will be secure. Fingers crossed there's not going to be much of an impact. But it, just by the very nature of these things, of the 15,000 approximately jobs at risk, it looks likely some of those jobs will be shed. So you just think carefully, have a chat with your family. Don't bottle it up to yourself, by the way. There's nothing worse than feeling anxious, feeling stressed, feeling about what am I going to do, and bottling that up. And I would certainly say you need to make sure sooner rather than later that you seek some support, talk to your union, talk to support agencies out there. Do not try and battle this on your own. So share it with your family if appropriate. Now that's the employees, and there's a lot more I'm going to share, as we get to hear more things coming out. I'll just say good morning to Jez. Good morning to you there. So we'll just talk about this. I don't know if this is one of your things. So now we're now going to talk about the next group, which tends to be neglected in an administration, and that's obviously on the consumer. There's a few things I think to be aware of as far as consumers are concerned. So as a consumer, if you've bought goods from any of the groups that are within the Arcadia group, and those goods are faulty, subject to an administrator being appointed, you still have legal rights under the Consumer Protection legislation. Consumer Rights Act 2015, I believe, is the more relevant one. If your goods are faulty, to go and ask for your money back. The administrator, whether you actually get your money back immediately, certainly if it's an administration time, is a question mark, but you still have protection. You may have got a gift card, believe it or not. So somebody's bought you a gift card for one of the stores within the Arcadia group. You still have the right, okay, but unfortunately here, it's the administrator who's going to make the decision about whether they're going to honour those gift cards or not. If you bought the gift card yourself, which is probably unusual, but you might have done, and it's over £100, then the Consumer Rights Act, I believe it's Section 71, will give you protection if you spend £100, between £100 and £30,000 on your credit card and debit card. So you may look to get some protection via the credit card company. If somebody else has bought the gift card for you, my advice would be use it, spend it right now if you can. At least you'll be able to get those goods, assuming those items are in store. So I expect to see a bit of a spending spree at these high street stores accordingly. I'm just going to say hello to a couple of people. So Jez, I've said hello. Nadine, that's very kind of you to say so. Good morning to you. So I would say for me, I'm not going to profess to be an expert on the Consumer Rights Act. I'm not going to profess to be an expert on all these things I'm talking about. I've been in business for 26 years. I've been involved in the world of business for about 35, 40 years. I know it doesn't look like with my skincare regime. And it's having awareness here, and it's saying, with all that noise going on, don't be drowned by it. Lick your wounds. Get some clarity about what's going on, cut through the noise, and make sure that you pursue these things. And if you can't pursue them on your own, don't be shy and don't be embarrassed about going for support agencies out there. So consumers, my advice would be, if you've had a gift card from anybody in the Arcadia group, so we've talked about Dorothy Perkins, Topshop, Miss Selfridge, Burton's, etc., I would suggest you use your gift card sooner rather than later. Once the administrator is appointed, it's up for them whether they honour that gift card or not. If somebody else has bought the gift card for you, it's worthwhile talking to them and effectively saying, if they've spent more than £100, that's obviously a very generous gift, then they are the ones who are going to have to go back to the credit card company as well. All the major credit card companies, by the way, publish on their websites their chargeback policies, their policies for redeeming goods and services, especially if they've been faulty. So again, there's a bit of research there for you actually to do as well. Now, as far as consumers are concerned, as I said, I'm going to be talking about the demise, if you can call it that, of Arcadia Group. From what I know about the Arcadia Group, COVID-19 has certainly pushed them over the edge. COVID-19 has certainly probably accelerated their demise. And there's a lot of commentators who are saying that, the Arcadia Group lost its relevance in terms of that transformation from physical space to online space. I think you can say that for a lot of retailing outlets and lots of businesses. There's lots of reasons people put forward here, but there have been challenges to the retailing over the last few years anyhow, and I think COVID-19 just accelerated that process. But again, that's a conversation for another broadcast. That's not really the focus point of what I'm talking about today. So consumers, you have still got some protection. Gift cards, credit card purchase, there is some element of protection. Once you move into an administration process, by the way, my experience is that it's going to take much longer to process that, and there's going to be a greater likelihood of you not actually fully getting the money back on the goods if they've been defective. So again, watch out for the stampede. Obviously, we've got lockdown restrictions, so the timing is really quite, bizarre and quite rubbish in a sense of coronavirus. We've got retailings that currently this year, there's been about 20 top brands that have already gone into administration, gone into liquidation. We know it's a tough battle out there for retailers and high streets. So this, and with Brexit coming up as well, more about that I'm going to comment at the end. Now, the third group of individuals, businesses that are affected by the knock-on effect of an administration and potentially a liquidation. And on that point, I would say, certainly based on my experience, when a company goes into administration, the ideal outcome is it comes out the other side pretty much intact but improved. I don't actually think it's likely to happen. If we do, as it's suspect, and my reasons for saying that the Arcadia Group is going to go into administration is because when asked about it 2 weeks ago, they said, no, that's not even in our thought process. The paper and the journalists, whatever one thinks of them, would not publish a story of this magnitude unless they had the inside track, unless they had that senior management director's insight saying, okay, this is what's likely to happen. So they're managing expectations. They're doing a bit of a shout out now for prospective buyers. Whatever happens here, the normal thing is they will not be buying the companies as they are. If you check out some previous broadcasts I've had, by the way, on what happens when companies are looking to sell, one of the options is you sell the underlying business, the underlying trade, or you sell the shares in the company. My personal view would be you're not going to be buying the shareholding, because that means you take on the obligations and the responsibilities as well. So it's the trade, it's the goodwill, it's the IP, it's the staff team that go with that, etc., etc. That's what's going to be transferred into a new entity. Now, with that, what that will mean is there will be some headcount, because other businesses will be looking to subsume that with their current infrastructure. They'll be looking for economies of scale. They'll be wanting to access to all that database of all the customers. They won't want to take on the company itself and everything that it has. So they'll be looking for the cherry bits there as well. There'll be some cherry picking. Some of the brands, will wither and die, unfortunately, or there'll be lesser versions of themselves. So again, being a pragmatist, a realist here, there is likely to be a knock-on effect in terms of headcount. There's a knock-on effect in terms of the suppliers as well. Let's talk about suppliers. It's not always, I think, factored in. The emotions go for, obviously, the employees. The focus tends to be on the owners, like Philip Green is right. He's a man of many facets as such. We can criticise what he's like in living that lavish lifestyle, expect them, but effectively you can't, deny his brilliance for building up an empire. You can obviously comment quite rightly so on how he spends his money, his avarice potentially, but that's what gets lost there is what's the impact on the supply chain. Now, any business to function effectively has a supply chain. So we think about the Arcadia group. In order for it to function, it's got to buy those clothes from someone. So somebody's actually making those clothes. Some of those companies are UK based. Some of those are overseas based. Those companies will have staff. Those companies will have employees. And typically for an impact on the supply chain is any monies that are owed to those existing suppliers. So it's going to be an immediate cash flow impact. So if I'm supplying the Arcadia group with clothes that I'm manufacturing, I could be supplying some knowledge to them. So I could be supplying services. Typically, I will supply those and I will be having to wait to get paid. Now, it's likely that those suppliers already are experiencing cash pressures because they're not being paid at the moment. Once it moves into administration, the likelihood of getting that money is going to be much less. And if it does go into an administration brackets liquidation process, they're going to get less than the money they're owed. So they're going to get a proportion of that. So suppliers, you probably are doing this and you should be doing it. Get your cash flows up to date. Factor in the risk, the likelihood of not getting paid, and then think what the impact is. And I can share, I've got loads of resources for you on cash flow planning. Obviously, lots of other people will have as well, but obviously I'm doing the broadcast, so I'm going to share what I've got. Check out, obviously, the website. There's some stuff about what you should be doing. Think about your cash flows. You should always do your cash flows, but this is probably a very pertinent time to get those updated. There's an emotional impact. Emotion, you can't discharge that. And I fully embrace that and understand that. But as a business, you've got to be thinking about what do I do next. Number two, you may have goods already supplied to them. If you've got what's called a reservation of title clause, which says those goods remain yours until actually you get paid for them, then you've got the rights to actually get those goods back. So if the company does go into a situation where it looks quite deadlocked, again, remember your reservation of title clause. If you're thinking, what's he talking about? Any supplier who supplies goods to a company, you can put what's called a reservation of title. If I put my own legal hat on when I studied law many years ago, you have something called a remarkable clause that says when I sell goods to you, the legal title remains mine until I actually get paid for those goods. So if you haven't got one of those reservation of title clauses in, I would suggest you check your future contracts. Now, if the company's moving out of administration, by the way, or moving to a different phase, it may be that the administrator needs you to be important now. So if you're an important part of the supply chain, it may be they want you to continue. And I would certainly suggest if they are asking you to continue, get paid up front before you deliver any more goods or services with that. So it doesn't mean that they're going to stop using you. You've got your current debt, which obviously there's going to be a challenge getting all that money out. There's also going to be a continuation there. So you're in a position to negotiate preferential terms. If the business is sold on, which looks likely, and you're an important part of that supply chain, then you have to renegotiate, get in there with a new entity who's buying the brand, who's buying that business, and you're reformulating new terms and conditions with them. It's still going to be challenging. It's still going to be things to think about. And what this also means is if you've actually got a large amount of time and energy and investment tied up with the Arcadia group, and there looks like they're in trouble and they're going to be liquidated potentially, and there's issues with the administration, then maybe it's the time to start thinking about, if you haven't already, about diversifying your client base, perhaps looking to communicate with the rest of your own supply chain to make them aware. So communication is really an important thing that goes across the board. So you need to think, okay, if I've got challenges now because of the relationship with the Arcadia group or relationship with any company going to administration, I need to make sure I understand what's going on, what the impact on my business is, do your cash flows, do your business plans, react quickly, get that idea, get that business thing put together, knowing what the challenges are, deal with it, but make sure you communicate those effectively to all the related stakeholders. Now, folks, that was pretty much it. So I know there's a lot more that I can talk about that, but I think us as business owners, us as members of the public, yes, we want sympathy, share that sympathy. So if you know somebody is affected, it may be that you've got opportunities to offer them. So people who work in retailing have got an incredible amount of skills that are transferable. You form customer relationships, work ethic, taking instruction. So employees, update your CVs if you need to. Think what's out there. Think about your life plans. It might be too early to make those decisions right now, but at some point when it gets a bit more established what's going on, when it gets a bit more certain, you have options. I'm not saying they're easy, but it's not the end of everything there as well. Support those individuals where we can. Supply chains, if you're affected by the Arcadia group, you're owed money. If you're a business supplying to somebody involved in that, there's going to be conversations, there's going to be communications. Let's share some understanding and let's share some understanding what's going on in our own businesses. In terms of all the fuller detail, I'll share some more when we get to know some more details about that, and I'll share some information over the next few days about what you can access. So look at things like HMRC, Universal Credit, new Job Seekers Allowance, look at things like Citizen Advice Bureau, talk to your union, talk to your family. And listen, all I will say is fortitude, sanguinity, if that exists, and positivity, easier said than done. And just as a heads up, we've got the magic B word coming in the month, so I just thought I'd add that at the end. I'm going to be sharing a blog on, well, shall I tell you what it's about? I'll let you know what it is at the moment in terms of Brexit. So we're going to be talking about Brexit next week. Podcast coming out tomorrow on the self-employed grant extension. Worthwhile listening. If you want to catch up with anything previously, check it out in the my profile feed, my website. And apart from that, I'm just going to love you and leave you. Have a fantastic Saturday as the best you can. And if you are in that scenario of the Arcadia group, my thoughts go out with you guys. And let's hope something positive and good, the maximum can come out of all this disarray that's happening in the retail sector. Okay, everybody, thank you for your company. Thank you for your time. And I'll see you guys shortly. Let's just play out with a nice bit of upground music. Let's go.